This is our roundtable panel from people different sides of the industry because we need everyone to all come together to make this happen. And Karl, who's the head of strategy at Sonobi, is going to be moderating our esteemed panel. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Sean. Is this, everybody hear me okay? Is this mic on? Is it on? Turn up the volume on this a little bit. Thanks. All right, so if anybody's outside and can hear this, come on inside. We're going to get started. All right. First, I want to thank everybody for coming today because I know it's a busy time of year. There's a lot going on right now. There's probably a conference every other day somewhere in the country that you could be attending or around the world. So thanks for coming today. We have a fantastic panel representing the supply and the demand side of the market. And we're going to have a couple of great questions for these guys. But first, I wanted to set up this conversation around what it is that we're talking about today. And this might be a little bit of a review of what we've hit on today in a couple different ways. But I'm a firm believer of hitting on things 3 or 4 times because that's the way it resonates. We published a little blog last week or 2 weeks ago around the evolution of audience buying, the evolution of audience buying and selling. And we've looked at a lot of different shapes and circles and squares today, but this is kind of yet another way to do it. I think in every one of the presentations today, you've seen someone try to explain what premium programmatic is. I believe I have the best definition and easiest way that everyone can turn around and tell this to their counterparts when they go back to work. To me, this evolution is it's really all about 2 things. It's about workflow and it's about supply. In media and advertising, we've never really touched workflow, most of us. There are a lot of people that who's in an operations role at their company? Who's on? So trafficking and ad ops as a media salesperson or a content creator or anybody that's been in media, those roles are very defined and they're very specific. Workflow doesn't always impact us, but workflow is impacting everyone in the media space today. And we're going through that evolution in a very deliberate fashion. And oftentimes when you are going to work every day and you're trying to hit your quarterly numbers and hit the expectations of management, you don't see things evolve over time because it's right here in front of your face. And so I think this evolution that's happening, if you just simply zoom out a little bit for once and take a time out and look at where we've been, you're going to easily see why we're headed where we are headed. So the whole concept is a simple matrix. You've got workflow, manual workflow, and automated workflow. And you've got supply, remnant supply, and premium supply, inventory. Another word for inventory. So the matrix just flows like this. You first had ad networks in the 2003 and 4 period come about, and media buyers said, here's an easy way for me to buy scale. I can get to scale via this media plan if I put this ad network on my media plan. The next evolution, several years later, as technology crept in, we started to see scale-based buying become automated. But it was still remnant inventory that we were automating. So the ad exchange came into being and really started this whole technology renaissance in terms of what ad tech was focused on. When ad tech started focusing on workflow with the advent of the exchange, ad tech became an incredibly hot and valued sector of the marketplace. We then had the advent of private marketplace a couple years ago. Those of us that were selling media and using DSPs to get access to media, we started seeing the buyer want access to more media. They wanted actually incremental reach and frequency, and they wanted premium supply. And the only way to do that was through a private marketplace. So then what happens? Then you start, I'll never forget seeing my first private marketplace buy executed. It took about 50 emails and 25 phone calls. And it was more painful than actually buying on an I/O and simply just doing it the old way. So this manual solution to getting access to premium inventory it's certainly a solution, but the beautiful thing about automation is it's a much more democratic way of thinking about buying media. You're placing media buys where you should be placing, but leveraging technology to do some of the automation and decisioning about how much I should place where. So that's that whole issue. So here we are. We've traveled the spectrum of these different things This is like the evolution of the lobster, John, I think. And here we are. We're in the upper right quadrant, or in Karl's chart, it's the upper left quadrant. In Karl's chart, it was actually grayed out. We're here today to try and fill in the color of this. What it represents is it's the next side of the mountain. The next frontier in ad tech media buying and selling is premium programmatic. It's the perfect complement to the open market. We're going to automate the premium side of the market, and we're going to make it easier to buy and sell media holistically across the workflow that is, the activation of media. So on top of this automated supply on the top two grids there is what sits on top of that is the buy-side platform. And you can use any buy-side platform you want. There will be various solutions plugged into those buy-side platforms to get access to automated inventory that's premium inventory. And that's what we're going to start building on. So without further ado, I want to introduce our roundtable. And it's actually, we called it a roundtable, but it's actually kind of like a panel. It's a sexier word for panel, because we have this is the offensive line of the New York Giants coming up here in 2 seconds. So Joe couldn't be with us. I'm sorry, Joe couldn't make it today. He was impacted by he's okay, but he was impacted by the commute with the Metro North issue. These five gentlemen have a combined experience of something like 215 years in the media space. Rob Byrnes, the SVP of Pricing and Planning at Gannett, started his career, I learned this morning, at the Village West Side Spirit newspaper. And here he is 20 years later at Gannett, which is pretty amazing. And in between, he spent time at a lot of premium publishers, NBC, at one point, ESPN, I believe. So he's been around the block and he knows what he's talking about. Larry Allen joined us. He is managing all supply side partnerships for Xaxis. He's head of global platform sales for Xaxis. Xaxis is a premier large trading operation, media buying and trading operation within the Group M empire. Reid, all the way down from Toronto and uptown at Ogilvy. He runs, and he's a pioneer of the practice of automated premium buying. He's done stuff up in Toronto with that marketplace that 2 years ago he was doing that we would really love to get going down here in terms of the relationships and the dynamics around that. He spent a lot of time at Publicis prior to Ogilvy, and he's another gentleman who's very well spoken around the whole notion of programmatic media. He actually started a blog called InsideDigital.org, which is like it's the Canadian version of Business Insider, basically. I think a good way to put it. Chip Schenck. Chip Schenck is the VP of Programmatic Sales and Strategy at Meredith Corp. Chip was formerly at Meredith. Formerly at Programmatic. He is another pioneer in the whole world of private marketplace, the evolution of bringing incremental supply online, and he has been very well publicized recently in the news in several different trades around his efforts to kind of transition the Meredith Corp into a progressive seller of media. Rick Greenberg finally is probably the one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. He and I spent some time at MediaMath together. He founded a company called the Kepler Group, and they're doing some fantastic things. It's a consultancy, an integrated consultancy and strategy firm. They've got several clients. They've had runaway success. If you have questions or know people that need help, his firm can help you. So come on up, guys, and we'll get this conversation started. Sit anywhere you like. And I've got three topics I'm going to cover, and then I'm going to turn this thing off. We're going to talk about friction points in the market. We're going to talk about programmatic for brands, and then we're going to talk about questions that we have for each other. So can we turn this off so we don't get blinded up here?
Chris, which way side?
I'll sit over here. All right, so I saw this thing published today. Forrester released a study today called The Future of Business, and they surveyed CMOs and executives from several Fortune 100 companies. You can look this up. Forrester, The Future of Business. They cited that 74% of the executives they surveyed at these companies said that they have a digital strategy that they believe is the right strategy to execute success for their companies. But only 14% of them believe that they have the talent and the wherewithal to execute those strategies. So I think that's a great thing for you, Rick, because potentially you can help them execute. But so tell me, that to me right there is a good point of friction. Rick, what do you find with your clients in terms of their level and ability to execute?
So we find, I think the 74% is inflated. I think that's people wanting to hear themselves say that they've figured it out. We do work with several Fortune 100 companies at the CMO level, and we do find a tremendous appetite and openness that is, in my mind, having been on the vendor side for about 15 years, pretty unprecedented. An appetite for change and a recognizance that the world is changing quickly and they need to stay in touch with it. So the 74% might be a little inflated. I think the 14% is probably about right. And I think it is a combination of the world changing faster than big corporates can keep up with, as well as, with due respect to my colleagues on the panel, I think it's changing very quickly for the big holding company agencies to keep up with as well. And part of that is there are units within the big holding companies that are at the front edge, but those aren't necessarily the units that are contracted with or are the front end of the relationship with these big corporate clients. And that has a lot to do with holding company dynamics and other issues. And so it does feel like there is this moment in time right now where we're going to see a tipping point for corporate appetite for change. And I think it's up to us on the panel to figure out how to satisfy that, because it is unsatisfied at the moment.
How are you handling it at Xaxis?
I think you're right. I mean, we certainly partner with our sister agency companies to educate the clients, and we feel like we are on the cutting edge, and we're leveraging the technology that we've got and the experience. We've hired a lot of really smart people, and continue to hire because there is that kind of lack of talent, and we're trying to use that to our ability to educate the client directly, and also the agencies to help them be smarter about how they're planning and buying.
It's a lot. I think Terry used the word unlearn, and I find that a lot of it is, if you know one way of doing it, unlearning how to do that is critical, and that's got to be hard because you've got the same people that have taught them one way trying to teach them to a new way. Mm-hmm. So, from the supply side, do you guys have a feeling about the point of friction within your own organizations evolving the way they think about programmatic? It's been perceived as a threat in the first chapter.
I would say I'd say it's definitely perceived as a threat, and it's about education, right? So the biggest thing I like to talk about is how programmatic is going to transition, or at least I see programmatic transitioning from a sales channel to a sales tool. It's about education and getting your sales team sort of on board with understanding that programmatic's not the enemy. It's really a better way of delivering on an audience. So, we talk about, for years we've been talking about the relationship between the buyer and the seller. We call it a partnership, and then it turns into a media transaction. I think that programmatic has the capacity to sort of change the equation and or the conversation around adding more relevancy to media buys. Helping our partners reach a more relevant audience with everything that we do. So the homepage takeovers and the big whiz-bang units will always be there, but programmatic will now come into the direct sales conversation as a sales tool.
Chip, will programmatic be on the business card, or to me, you're actually introducing complexity that doesn't need to be introduced when you're out there selling with people.
I actually just want to tag on to something that Rob said, which I'm thoroughly in agreement with Rob, partially because Rob is actually at Meredith just directly before I was, and so he did a great job of getting the organization kind of to understand where we were.
Thank you.
But I think the threat thing is it's a series of pockets, and that actually comes down to the traditional kind of look of salespeople. You've got your progressive salespeople, you've got on one side, and you've got your hangers-on on the other side. And the great thing that programmatic will do is it'll help the organization self-select. right? So that over a period of time, your sales force will start to change and morph into, let's say, a series of a couple different sales forces. People who are more corporate oriented and kind of tip of the spear and are having solution driven conversations, and you'll still always have those people who are kind of moving inventory, whether it's part of a big deal or not part of a big deal. And I think the people who are on the solution end will actually start to see programmatic in a much different way, and not even as a threat, almost as literally a different way in to have a better conversation. And it's something that I've noticed early on, that there are more folks on the agency trading desk side who actually want to have a dialogue. My wife is on the buy side, and she busts my chops all the times for saying that plans are spit out of a box, because I see her working until 2 in the morning putting together plans. But at the end of the day, there's no time on the traditional agency side to have conversations, have quality solution-driven conversations. They're just too overworked. And so I think programmatic gives everyone that nice pause to kind of try it a different way. Mm-hmm. So to answer your second, your newer question, I'm not sure the way that we look at it is the same as most others in terms of what we're thinking and how we're thinking about programmatic. And I would say programmatic premium, because programmatic is what it is. In fact, I kind of looked at Terry's description up there, and I was like, I don't know. I kind of thought that ad nets are an early form of automation, and therefore I would have lumped them in with the early form of programmatic. But I think it's a definition thing. But for us, it is absolutely a conversation starter. Therefore, it's going to be on my business card right now. But I actually see I have 2 roles. I have programmatic and I have data. And I actually see probably within the next 12 months the programmatic kind of going off, and we'll talk about data monetization. Because I see programmatic as a subset of data. It's an execution, whereas data is an asset.
Right. Right. One could be sold more overtly. The other is really a lot about workflow.
Yeah.
So it's how you execute and bring value forward for the buyer.
Exactly.
Do you guys, what do you, Ray, inside your organization, what's your approach been to talking about programmatic with clients? Is it a trading desk approach? How do you think about it?
We actually try not to actually talk about the technology. We try not to talk about the platforms. We try to talk about the benefits that all this ecosystem brings to the table. It's tremendously complex, as we all saw in Terry's earlier slide. This is a tremendously complex ecosystem. And so clients don't have the time or the desire to get into that depth of detail. What we talk about are the capabilities that technology enables in terms of them achieving their brand objectives. And so when we talk about that, it elevates the conversation to a level where they understand it at a senior level, very much what Rick is doing in his team. Then we get down to the people who are actually getting into the minutia, and then we can get into the details. But to sell it through, if you start with technology, you lose them. If you start with the ecosystem, you lose them. It is what is the benefit of this ecosystem, how can it help them achieve their objectives?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time actually at Xaxis building products that our agencies can take to clients.
Yeah.
So we've really tried to simplify all the complexities in the ecosystem, and now that we've married supply and demand together inside the same organization, we're actually taking that a step further, and we're actually pre-processing inventory as we bring it into the marketplace, putting it into different buckets based on tactics, goals that clients would want to achieve, categorization, all these things that you would think about as a planner and kind of have it in a kind of ready-made bundle that then they can programmatically buy against at scale, which then drives efficiency, makes them feel good about the inventory and the quality that they're getting. There's a credible stamp of approval on it because it's coming through the buy side of the business, which is acting on behalf of the client, right? Which we think is paramount, because when you're buying just in the open market, it's catch as catch can. You might be buying the right person, but you may not be buying it in the right place at the right time. And so we're trying to help just backstop against that.
Yeah.
We've seen some big holding companies project 50% of their spend, or put a number out there that in 3 years we plan on having 50% or 60% of our media running through these channels. Is that a realistic number? And or in the case of your organization, are you guys working under a goal to have much running through those pipes?
We're all programmatic, so I would say we're well beyond the 50%.
The parent,
and within Group M, we're
Sir Martin has a very clear description of where he wants things to go.
Yeah. I mean, we're well way on that path.
Okay.
Yeah. There's one thing I'd like to qualify, though, about that 50% or greater. The one thing people do a lot is talk about premium programmatic in the sense of it's DR related. that 50% becomes much more real when you think about it's a hybrid between DR and brand. Programmatic is not necessarily saying we're running straight to DR. What we're talking about is a better way of buying audiences efficiently. And in the ecosystem, what we have to acknowledge from a publisher side is that publishers don't sell out 100% of their inventory throughout the year. And so being able to tap into that premium audience, that premium inventory is a method of doing it, and that fills in that 50%. So it actually could be greater than 50% in a very short period of time when you're putting the two together.
It's just as an interesting part. So I don't know if WPP has also made a 50% prediction. I know IPG is kind of the one that kind of put their stake in the ground. I don't know 12 months ago or something and said it. But to Ray's point, I think it's partly programmatic as we know it today is going to continue growing, in whether it's programmatic open, programmatic premium, programmatic direct. But it's when you get the big dollars, right? 80% of all the money out there is still the direct sold, kind of the, as I think Terry said, hand sold.
Yeah.
And as soon as you programatize some of that, you get to that number, and as soon as you bring in those brand dollars, you get to that number much faster. So I actually, from the sell side, I actually think it's pretty exciting. I think the real challenge is actually, can the agency holding companies get their traditional planners and buyers, their traditional digital planners and buyers, if that's kind of an oxymoron, but and their technology and their audience buying platforms together fast enough to have the conversation so that can actually be happening across every single deal. A couple groups have done it. They've created these integration groups between, but that's really like a super fast education process that has to happen, because pretty soon you either have to have a one-to-one relationship or you've got to have those traditional buyers learning this stuff pretty fast to be able to make recommendations on their own.
And that's where the talent issue comes in,
right.
is that you don't have enough people from the traditional side whose jobs are already, to your comment about your wife, is already overworked.
Totally
and
overworked.
there's not enough hours in the day, that you now want to add in the complexity of learning this entire ecosystem to be able to intelligently talk about it. That's a challenge, and that's why the specialist
The dollars are
groups-
there. It's
Yes.
just it is that process, the same painful process that as a publisher we're going through to educate sales teams and get the organization comfortable. I think in some ways it's even more painful on the buy side.
Yeah, I mean, we have the benefit of being young. I mean, we were invented specifically to take advantage of the tech ecosystem that exists today. So well north of 50% of our IMPs are programmatic in the way that the supply side defines programmatic, meaning it's decisioned in some form of real time. 100% of our IMPs are tech-enabled. So we were able to start the methodologies and the workflow and the processes from the ground up to dismiss paper-based IOs. And we do plenty of direct buying and plenty of brand buying, but every one of those direct buys is still integrated into what we would call programmatic planning. So there are decision rules that are reacting to the fact that a consumer may have seen a guaranteed impression. Well, the next impression they see is going to be different than it would be if they hadn't seen that direct bought impression. So I think very quickly 100% of media should be tech-enabled and decisioned in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's 100% transactionally decisioned, I think is going to be based on the
Funny, I would almost go the opposite. Only because, not in the sense that, not in a combative way, but saying I think the transaction capability of programmatic can actually happen that, but I think there's still a human decisioning element. I'm a traditional sales guy by trade, but also I think that there's a place for human decisioning and there's a place for machine decisioning, but all tech enabled.
And to be clear, I'm not saying we literally have a push button and everyone goes out to lunch and the campaigns all optimize themselves. We're working on that. But yeah, I mean, the human element is fundamental and frankly is going to continue to be fundamental, right? I mean, if we use the tried and true Karl area of the financial markets to the media market, everyone uses a platform to trade whatever equities or commodities or items that they're trading, but the human element sitting behind that trading platform is making all the difference. So that's why we've got econometrics folks that are doing data mining and segmentation and decision rules development. But you still have to have machines making the decisions in the moment, right? When the person who just saw one buy shows up somewhere else, you can't have a human that's making that decision. But we have humans that are informing all of that decisioning, and it's all happening very synergistically. And I think that will continue to happen as the folks like these guys start to come more to the fore than the holding company environment.
You guys have progressive media planning and buying agencies. I think what would be helpful to help move this further and further along at a pace that fulfills everyone's hopes and desires. To me, the exercise around what media planners do in a tech-enabled environment is so completely different than what they do today.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it's in your interest to have all those guys do it faster. It's my interest to not have them do it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can
There's
swoop
a-
in as the
Exactly.
hero that says, hey,
There's a nice tension between the worlds colliding where you're seeing from the publisher side, they very much want that human element inside. We from the agency side want that efficiency of fewer resources, higher margins, more automation. But it's finding that balance, and there is that tension between the two that we're going to have to come to some level of agreement that there's a human factor involved and that there is automation built into the system as well.
What I'm seeing that's actually helpful, I think, helping us get towards that is programmatic's now becoming a request in every upfront conversation. So as we're getting into those and we talk about commitments and long-term guarantees, there's always a sort of a rider or a bullet point that says, okay, what's the programmatic offering and how is that going to look? So it's certainly interesting.
yeah.
Do you see a marketplace, more of traditional media, TV broadcast type marketplace where the buy side places their bets on annual deals and we get out of this quarterly RFP driven cycle and then there's an always on scatter every day making buys?
Love
type
to get out of the RFP
yeah.
cycle. I'll defer to you guys. I would
mean,
love the
we're-
upfront.
We're
aspect.
headed in that direction. I mean, we're doing that in Europe now in a pretty aggressive way. And we're looking at ways to put technology in place to actually make that much more leverageable, if you will, and efficient for both, more for the buy side especially, but certainly when we're looking at making a commitment with a publisher, we want them to take part in that commitment process in order for us to both get a fair and equitable deal, which I think, again, we're now in a very unique position because we're trying to look at it from both sides of the equation at the same time and make sure that there is this notion of transparency and control. I have a long-standing publisher background, and so that's a really big, important part for me as part of the supply chain, is making sure that every publisher that we're partnering with as part of a longer-term deal feels like they're playing a really big role in enabling us to make our clients successful.
See, the one interesting thing about upfront commitments, everybody loves upfront commitments. The challenge is when you start talking about real-time decisioning and flexibility between moving inventory to achieve specific objectives, upfront commitments have this perspective that, well, here's a brick, this is what you buy, and that's all you get, which is kind of contrary to the nature of programmatic. So from a publisher perspective, you want that upfront commitment. From a real-time decisioning process, we want to be able to move and buy inventory based on where it's performing best, whether it's brand or whether it's performance. So the skin in the game is really important to say, how do we offer you the commitment, but also we have the flexibility to be able to drive that relationship and that performance.
And I was going to say, I have a theory about that in terms of the way that we're positioning it, and this may resonate with Rob for multiple reasons or different reasons, but for upfronts to work, if you look at TV, there's lots of scale, right? And there's lots of unique shows, right? They're there to kind of push the unique shows, but in reality, it's a lot of the old shows are also being sold at the same time, right? It's packaging.
Yeah.
So for publishers in the digital world, I think scale is ultimately important, but I think the player there is not the content, because the content is a given, right? That separates a premium from a non, but it's data. So what's going to separate and differentiate my fabulous content from someone else's fabulous content who also owns the demographic of women? I think it's the conversation of the way you want to give me 100 million versus them is because I've got data that's going to help actually make that decisioning more powerful so that you can continue to shift within my environment to help you hit your commitment but still perform.
And that's exactly the kind of conversation that we want to have, is what's going to enable us to continue to justify buying against your inventory, because we're able to see and acquire greater insights about why it's performing, why it's not performing, to continue.
So the goal is, you think about a standard media plan, right? You've got your top of the media plan has all of your sponsorship, ownership opportunities, and then normal media plans have a bunch of run of network.
Yeah.
And the run of network's job is to get the overall CPM down to something that the media buyer and the seller will agree to. What if all of that run of network was converted to programmatic?
That's right.
And then you do the programmatic upfront, similar to the way you do video upfront. So I'll come to you and say, here's 3 billion impressions that you can buy upfront at a pre-negotiated rate. And then what we'll do is each media plan, as it comes through, you can dip into that barrel and you can add programmatic to each plan from the upfront commitment that we've already made. Now you're finding that relevant audience. You're combining it with the sponsorship that you're already buying, and now the entire media plan is reaching a more relevant audience.
I think
That's
we've got a
the-
deal. I think we've got a deal. actually. We're done.
We're going to cocktail now.
We're frictionless now. It's beautiful. So let's change the topic to this is the new time spent chart that we stared at for 10 years, where there was like 80% time spent, and why are we only spending 8% of our money here? The new one is, when are all the brand dollars going to come? That's a new discussion. Like, these guys spend so much money, they're going to start pouring it into this thing, or what's the driving force there? Rick used to be a brand manager at Unilever. Have you seen clients that you've talked to that are brand-focused clients that want to sell soap look at this space and see it for what it can be?
So we do work with a lot of brand-oriented clients, none of them in the soap business. And they are very interested in this. So particularly when we can talk about how we can knit tactics together, and it's not just a siloed, hey, we're going to do a brand buy over here, and we're going to do some programmatic over there. But we start to knit together multiple channels, we start to knit together CRM, and they can start to see how we can progress people through a funnel from brand awareness to whatever action it is, whether it's a DR in the classic sense or it's just engagement. It becomes very powerful and interesting for them. So I think what will tip the scales in the favor of certain brand advertisers to putting more brand in what is now called programmatic is the availability of more quality inventory and high impact units as programmatic. I think there will be certain advertisers like the soap business where it'll be interesting because retailers have a lot of the media planning is done for the benefit of getting retail end caps and promotions and all that sort of thing. So it's much easier to have that conversation with a buyer in Arkansas, which is not a comment about Arkansas. It's a retail buyer who's got to see 20 people that day about end caps. Like, we're walking in, here's the media plan. You've seen media plans like this before. You can digest that information. Great, you got an end cap, next. So I think in the CPG world, it's a specific dynamic that'll has to work its way out. But I think for bigger brands that are either brick and mortar or e-commerce or just big brands that have less of a dependency on an intermediary, it's going to happen as soon as you guys let us do it, more of it.
The perspective that we've taken on it is that we talk about programmatic in the sense of how does it play a role within the overall media and communications plan. So whether it's TV, out of home, radio, print, digital, and so forth, what we do is we look at programmatic as an efficient means, as another touch point in front of the consumer. So when we look at it from an econometric modeling perspective or being able to drive attribution, it's how many touches will somebody need to see before they convert. And if we can find a way to increase the frequency of impression in front of that right audience, programmatic enables us to do that in the right content. And so we sell it in as a part of the overall communications plan about the frequency and engagement with particular brand as it pertains to the overall thing, not just the metric of converting online. Right. And that's where they buy in. If we're talking about just conversion online, they'll say, well, I don't sell soap online. And I say, great, but you still want to deliver an impression in front of the audience that is going to be one touch. The billboard's going to be another touch. The television ad's going to be another touch. How do we drive frequency and efficiency in digital? We do so through programmatic within the right environments. And then they get it and they go, great, let's put a percentage of our brand dollars into programmatic as a part of that overall story. And we find that works very well.
One of the things so I've been in a lot of conversations recently, just trying to get on a roadshow, go with my sales team, kind of get them comfortable hearing things, and we are hearing all sorts of different kind of requests around programmatic, which is fun because it kind of validates and it also surprises me even day in and day out. The one thing that I hear consistently is from CPG folks that because they're such big TV buyers, their request is one of their core KPIs, and this is no different across almost any CPG we talk to, which is delivery against target as measured by OCR, which is incredibly frustrating for me because it's basically you've got this Ferrari and this ability to do all this stuff, and yet you want to actually literally move the parking spot from here to here because you're tied to. I understand the need for driving it, to knit it together with the TV, but it's kind of frustrating because it's like there's so much more we can do, and by the way, you're working with a measurement that may potentially be flawed. May potentially be flawed, and so how is that? And so I think that's
those reach-based buys.
That's a brand buyer. So I'm not talking because they want reach, they want awareness, or their
want
other KPIs.
validation, right? I mean, and
Validation,
it's validation
yeah.
against a metric that they know and understand.
Right. So it's an
we
education
built
process.
that product into our suite as part of our brand suite. We have a premium tier of products that we work on with clients that is basically only runs on brand name publishers that a buyer would know
Right.
by trade, just out of the blue, and then pair that with high impact executions, whether that's video or homepage takeovers, and that it's all executed programmatically. But that's the kind of the first step solution, right, to get those dollars to start moving. And we look at the same metric in order to get them comfortable. You know?
And I want to address whether it's the right metric or the wrong metric, but it's the right metric. OCR can be a powerful lever to accelerating what Chris is talking about and what we're all desiring from a programmatic standpoint, because it's a way that brand buyers, CPG marketers can process how programmatic is acting within a multi-touch strategy.
Correct.
Right? So there may be better metrics that evolve down the road, but I think as a facilitator or as a bridge to get people from a traditional way of looking at media in a siloed fashion to looking at an integrated fashion, it's actually, we've seen it to be very powerful.
And is that because it's that knitting you're talking about? Like we think that's great because also, by the way, that leads more to an upfront market, right?
Right.
I mean, I think that's kind of probably the predecessor to upfront because then they're like, I feel comfortable buying across this company that has these 5 touch points because now I can use OCR. I just look at it and say, and I get concerned around, this being the primary metric again, is delivery against target when it's like, okay, so we've got 72 different data sources that can tell us that. Can you actually, instead of actually looking at it as a delivery against, use it as the way of saying, okay, what's my % penetration as relates to my other media?
Well, we take it a step further and use things like XCR to actually show cross-channel interaction at the unique level. So what % of uniques saw, this many, the right number of imps or touches or engagements by channel. And so that's where we find it to be much more powerful.
And that's the conversation that needs to happen is it's not just this area of programmatic unto itself, it's how does it fill within everything else. Right. The brand manager is going to be very interested in, and the fact that we can talk to one metric is what's going to bring more brand dollars into this than, oh, here's my programmatic money. No, let's look at your overall money and how we can measure that against one metric is an important conversation.
I think that intuitively the reason why reach is still an important thing is because for 50 years they've been doing reach-based media.
That's how they've been doing it. Yeah, exactly.
And so they want a way to do digital that way. And actually I think it's important that every publisher realizes that your configuration of how you monetize your inventory enables you to say yes to that type of buy. And that's what we're evolving into, and I think that's what that upper right quadrant's all about, is automating that premium access. Because if it is a multi-touch driven campaign, there is a multi-tiered price tolerance within that campaign to buy up when it has to.
Yeah.
All right, so does anybody have any other points? Sure, let's have a question.
I have a question. I think just because we've been doing it for 50 years isn't a good reason. No brand brief has ever been written that says I want to reach women 24 to 55 or whatever it is. Brand briefs are written to talk about psychographics and all these other things. And the reason we buy like that is because most people can't enable the other kind of buying. So
Yes.
I think I share your frustration. I think that's not a good answer back to this group because I think it may move brand dollars, but it's not a great metric, and we should work harder for that.
Trust me, I'm not saying that. I'm just letting people understand that the way the brand advertisers thinking about reach is
They're
simply
thinking about it differently, but they're executing because there is no other way to execute it.
Yeah. There's certainly a model that needs to evolve on the traditional side to catch up with where digital is in terms of the micro-targeting. Buying an audience 25 to 54 years old, there's 3 or 4 different segments within that. In digital, you can target against that. In traditional, you can't. And that's the challenge that we have on this side.
Because to your point, and this gets back to the first comment I think of the session, within particularly the Fortune 500 and their associated agencies and who they're dealing with, it still feels like there is no other way to buy digital than let's go after women 25 to 54 with maybe one behavioral layer overlaid on top of it. And that's where I think there has to be a fundamental shift, and that's why I think the Forrester study is interesting. There's an appetite to drive some change fully through the stack, both internally within the advertisers' marketing organizations and the advertising community to go change the way that plans and briefs are written. But you should still see things like reach frequency, engagement levels, what have you, play a role in how you measure a plan, but you're going to define the groups in which you're going to be measuring that much more granularly than you would women 25 to 54.
I'd like to just throw a plug to my colleagues at Xaxis who are actually doing a lot of work to actually push that conversation a little bit further down the road, especially when it comes into programmatic TV, which we're not going to talk about today.
No.
And certainly some acronym, television broadcasters and cable companies who are going in that direction. But Xaxis is already making those inroads to be able to facilitate that conversation in a way.
We're doing radio and digital out of home too.
Yeah, so it's all coming together.
There'll be Xaxis brochureware at the back.
XAXIS.
All right, so are we going to do some Q&A? Any other, if there are any other points anybody disagrees with, please fire away. Any questions for anyone for this illustrious group?
I do think the point was a little missed on the XCR and the OCR. Just because they're current standards, I agree with, I think it was over in this area, they're not correct. And I think it was over in this area because you're actually understanding your data from a publisher's perspective. And when you start to understand the data from a publisher's perspective that already has a relationship with consumers, you start to understand the doubt that you can really have across these measurement standards that are archaic in comparison. And when we start to leverage the data, I think it starts to get really interesting from a publisher's perspective and from a brand's perspective. It also occurs to me that as you start to talk about automation and as you start to talk about ad tech being part of that automation function, I think the agency world, and this is interesting around Xaxis, but the agency world needs to look at this a little differently too. Because as you leverage ad tech and don't have a relationship with consumer directly, you're taking data from other folks, and you have publishers that have direct relationships with consumers, and you have brands that have direct relationships with consumers. Getting in the middle and avoiding the conversation around creative and around planning and focusing in on data and focusing in on technology tends to, there was a place and time for it, and I think that pendulum is moving away from that place and time.
Where do you think it's moving to?
I think it's moving back towards the middle, where early on it was around creative and no justification. Now it's on super justification and no understanding of creative optimization, and actually then going beyond that to discussing marketing initiatives and how we're really solving those problems. We've gotten into this world where we're so happy sending an I.O. and negotiating on an I.O. or sending a schedule from a TV perspective and negotiating on a schedule. And we've gotten away from what we were supposed to fundamentally do, which was solve marketing problems.
I think we get stuck and we look at each individual silo,
Yeah.
and we kind of get lost in the weeds in each one. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to use data to justify the context with which the ad is showing up in and making sure it shows up at the right time with the right person, and also have a great creative execution based on what the goal or objective is of the client, right? If I have a brand advertiser, I want the largest ad unit possible, and I want the highest engagement with that ad unit possible. If I have a DR-focused client that all they want to do is sell a widget, then the size of the unit doesn't matter. I want the best price possible, right? And so, because that's what's going to justify the ROI. So I think that you have to look at all three of those things, and I've talked about this for probably 8 years, and everyone thought I was crazy when I talked about creative being an important part of the, well, thank you. But I think that all three of them are important, and you have to look at them equally, and we've had a hard time because one piece moves faster than the other, and then the other one has to catch up, and we have then disruption, and economies collapse. And
I think part of your comment actually speaks to the tension that exists within the overall ecosystem right now. Agencies have to evolve. As much as we're asking publishers to evolve and brands to sort of learn this new language of advertising, the agencies have to evolve. And part of that is, sort of in terms of what Rick's group is doing, is going in and understanding that we're talking about how to achieve client objectives. When I go in to see a client, I ask 2 questions. They're very simple questions. What problem are you trying to solve? What opportunity are you trying to seize? I do not bring out, here's all my widgets and all the things I can offer you. I have a Swiss Army knife of 16 different things I can use to achieve your objectives. No, what problem are you trying to solve? What opportunity are you trying to capture? As an agency, we haven't been well structured to actually have that conversation because we've been focusing on the silos. We now need to step out of the silos and we need to now start having a conversation about how do we help you achieve your objectives that involves the entire ecosystem of the publishers, the tech, the strategy and planning throughout the entire discussion.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't mean to indicate there's an elimination of agencies. That's not what I'm saying.
Thank you.
There is definitely a place in the ecosystem. I'm not sure it's around technology. Same thing with publishers. Publishers need to change their mode of thinking and get away from thinking O&O first and move into there's just one gigantic inventory pool. How are we solving a client's needs?
Well, I agree, and I think a lot of it's based on, by nature, big companies need to create silos and process. I mean, that's just how big companies operate. And having worked within a holding company environment, I understand that. And but I agree with you wholeheartedly, which is why we integrate all of our planning to include things like longitudinal touchpoint mapping, cross-channel contact strategies, message matrices that talk about how do you sequence messages across channels. And so it's not functionally within the large holding company agency, programmatic grew up as a transactional model, right? And to your point, it needs to evolve to a tool that's within an integrated suite of services that incorporates messaging, sequencing, measurement, analytics, segmentation, all that stuff. Because it does all come together in real time, right? Where now you can not only decision in real time whether you want to take a certain impression, but you can decision in real time which message you're going to put in front of that impression and why.
Well, the operative word there is planning, and I think that if I think about the role, and this was actually one of the questions that I had kind of thought about, which is what is the role for the future of an agency in an automated world? My answer looking from both the home view, but also from professional view, is the practice and the skill of planning and obs and strats is, I don't know if it's lost, but it's been lost in kind of the overall message of what is happening in the automated world. And I think that they're exactly what you're talking about, which is really the step back look and saying, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? But also, how are we going to do it, and what are all the tools at our disposal, and we'll bring you options for how you can solve.
Right.
Sorry, I don't think it's on. I've heard from several buyers that they don't like using Deal ID, and it doesn't quite work. And I don't really understand what isn't working. So, like I know Xaxis, you've kind of moved away from them. And can you talk a little bit about why it doesn't work and what the alternative is?
Yeah, so deal IDs don't work for us. We tried them many times. I think they will work on an individual campaign for a specific client. However, we've had a hard time scaling them across multiple publishers. And so we ended up, missing delivery and having to rejigger the campaign, and that became really problematic. And if you think about the scale of the organization and how many brands we're buying against simultaneously, we can't do deal IDs for every single one of them as one-offs. Then it goes back to that manual approach again, which is really what a deal ID is. It ends up being a single IO. And for our organization, we want to be able to buy programmatically for all of our clients simultaneously across any piece of inventory we have access to, which is why we started the marketplace.
Which is a friction point, right? In the sense of, if I think about programmatic as a technology, it's mass automation of one-to-one capability. And Deal ID is meant to be one-to-one, but I think there's a lot of situations, and we get approached about it all the time, where someone wants a many-to-one or a many-to-many relationship in an automated sense, and that's kind of basically using a widget designed for squares, using it for circles. Where I think that we move away from the many-to-many in this particular area, or if we want to execute many-to-many, there needs to be a different way. But Deal ID as a one-to-one is actually, it works quite well, especially when it's very transparent, and that was the point, is that it's transparent in terms of exactly who, when, how much, why, right, and where on both sides. So from that end, I think it works, but I think it's the usage of it in different scenarios that makes, that potentially makes it problematic.
Scaling is the issue. It's very hard to scale that across every single client that you're running programmatic through.
Yep.
And it's either you have it in place to do it all at once, or you're doing it on 10% and that's it, and then becomes a very manual thing. And as an agency, reducing resources is the goal, to be able to drive the efficiency through automation.
I mean, the impact is Deal ID actually caused us to spend less money with publishers directly.
On that Mandese one, when you're trying to
Yep.
do multiple
That's right.
clients to multiple pubs.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody in the crowd have a counter to this? I mean, we've talked to a lot of people over the last few months. It seems like people have had maybe a hard time or some challenges scaling Deal ID buys. Anybody have a different experience with that?
I think, first of all, Deal ID is used as a pretty loose term. So I'm from AOL, and from our perspective, and I work on the ad tech side, so advertising.com, AOL Networks. We may change our name, who knows?
Start the
But-
rumor mill now.
Is that
we
person
think
out
about ad network business, we think about our DSP, we think about our SSP, and we think about our business as a publisher. And out there across the SSPs and throughout our internal company, there's really 3 different types of deal IDs. Fixed price as a premium deal ID, which is no different than a direct buy, but you actually use a deal ID. A deal ID second price with a floor, which is good for the publisher, but kind of defeats the purpose for the advertisers, sort of. And then just no deal ID, except you call it a deal ID, and you whitelist a bunch of advertisers and you whitelist a bunch of publishers, and you put a floor on it. And I don't know that I'm necessarily disagreeing with anybody, but it seems like this conference is really down on deal IDs, and we're seeing a lot of opportunity, a lot of success with them. Whether you're actually specifically using a deal ID or it's the concept of a deal. And I think the biggest issue is when you try to use the actual deal ID and set up the actual deal ID in the SSP or with the publisher, or find it in the DSP, it's hard to find, and you need like 20 emails to like get it going.
Everything you just said makes me
Not scalable.
feel
Yes.
that it's, that choice is there's too much choice there for the buyer in many cases. I mean, all these solutions are steps along the journey towards simplified workflow. So I think you guys will everything will evolve over time, and we're not saying deal IDs don't work. They're very good for deliberate buying, for one-to-one buying.
I think they also served a nice role in the early days, where with that level of transparency and confidence, you could get programmatic buys done.
Yeah, you're creating behavior.
There were challenges that existed with
Right.
them, but it was a great stepping stone to get to gain momentum on programmatic.
Right.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Totally in the behavior creating stage.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody have any predictions they want to throw out for where we're going to be in 2 years? Like, what's the future chaos? More chaos? Does it get easier?
I think in a couple of years we just won't use the word programmatic anymore.
No.
That's just the way marketing is going to be done. So we don't use it we actually never use the word programmatic with clients. It's just part of what we do.
Value creation.
Agreed.
Rob, anything?
I don't know if it's 2 years, but the programmatic TV happens because internet becomes the distribution platform for television.
So you're going against Dave Morgan, who said it's going to be, what did he say
he
yesterday?
said
12
one
years
time,
away
yeah,
or something like that?
So
Yeah.
the interesting question is, when Google buys the rights to NFL football, and they can actually prove that NBC or whoever else or Fox said it's 6 million people watching it, and it's actually
That's a good point.
4 million people, what happens to OCR? What happens to all those measurement firms? What happens then? When you Google say, I actually have 4 million individual unique visitors who watch this, and you're telling me it's 6 and your pricing is based on 6, what happens then? The entire ecosystem feels an earthquake. That's going to be fun. I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for that one.
Nice. All right, so any more questions? That's it? I want to thank everybody, guests, panelists, for coming today. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.